All right. Welcome back into the podcast. I am very excited for this guest. He is the former director of player personnel for the Chicago Bears. He had that under the entire regime time of Ryan Pace with the Chicago Bears. And plenty of the guys that he's brought aboard have been a part of this podcast. David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen, Mitch Trubisky, Allen Robinson, Akeem Hicks. I could go on. But he is Josh Lucas, and he joins us now. Josh, Bill Zimmerman, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much. How are you?
Thank you, Bill, for having me. Excited to talk. Doing very well. I appreciate it.
Well, let's talk about the guy that your regime drafted there in your final year, and that's Justin Fields, who I think had a lot of fans concerned after those first few weeks, but perhaps here turning the corner. The numbers the last 2 weeks have been fantastic. He's thrown some beautiful deep balls, 8 touchdowns to 1 interception, over 600 yards. It hasn't been perfect. There's been a couple warts, but in terms of at least statistically, it really looks like Justin Fields is playing a lot better.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the first 2 weeks, Green Bay, Tampa, you saw some signs, you saw some flashes, also saw some concerning plays from the pocket where, the whole world has seen them. There was pictures circulated and, a lot of talked about non-throws that were there to make that he didn't make. But you saw some flashes of, what he can do, especially when we talk about, in the pocket, delivering the ball down the field. Kansas City, I thought, was bleak for the entire offensive side of the ball. I don't know if there was many quarterbacks on the planet that if you dropped them in that day in that situation could overcome what Justin had to overcome that day. Now, there's quarterbacks that would have played better and would have helped maybe overcome some of that stuff. But starting in week 4, Denver, Washington, obviously a huge jump in production. The first place you always need to start, because it's not just one. Everyone wants to just like, what changed with Justin? To me, he got more confident. Why was he more confident? The offensive line's getting healthy. That first and foremost. So your protection's better. Your run game the last 2 weeks has been more consistent, more productive on first and second down, giving him more manageable throws to make on third down. Talk about offensive play calling, the offensive coordinator, not only installing plays, but when to call those plays. And to me, he's doing a better job of keeping defenses off balance throughout the course of the game, moving the pocket more. It feels like the run game and the pass game are in sync. They're married together a little bit better. All that stuff is contributing to his confidence. And then let's not overlook the most obvious thing. They play 2 defenses that are towards the bottom of the league, if not the very bottom of the league in scoring defense. That's for a reason. Those teams give up big plays. And Chicago did what they should do against bad defenses. They put up explosive numbers and points, and Justin's numbers represented that. His rating represented that. And now the big question is, can he carry it over against defenses that have more backbone and put up more of way more resistance? And that's what you need to see over the course of the next 12 games to make you feel good that this guy can be a quarterback that, what we all want to say is a franchise quarterback. But the confidence leads to quicker decisions. It leads to convicted throws. And the scheme is opening up and allowing for receivers downfield that are coming open, and he's simply getting the ball to those guys.
Now, as someone who has worked in a front office, I mean, and you've pointed out a lot of it there, but for Justin specifically, are there things that you look for, beyond the box score? Because I think a lot of times we just look at a box score and go, oh, that quarterback played well, that quarterback didn't play well, didn't see the context of the game. Because I've seen some Justin detractors who have said things like, well, the Broncos, played a lot of man. and Justin can beat man a lot easier. And against Washington, it was some hitches that DJ Moore kind of did the rest. And DJ Moore, it was a lot of yak yardage that kind of DJ Moore did on his own. So you sit there and sit there and say anyone can kind of nitpick a game and take things away from a player. But for you personally, are there things, is it, time in the pocket, before he delivers the football? Are there certain things that you look for beyond that us fans cannot see?
Yeah, just really quickly on in-game, watching the tape, Washington, the first few chunk plays of the game were against zone coverage. So I think you saw over the course of 2 weeks, a lot of man, a lot of zone. He's beaten both of them. For me, obviously, quarterback play comes down to playing on time within the scheme, knowing where to go with your eyes, getting the ball out on time, and then when it's not there, being able to produce off-script offense. And I think you're seeing both of it. He's creating offense, and then he's just playing simply within the rhythm. I talked about this last week on some media stuff I did. The most important thing about the last 2 weeks, by far to me, is rebounding from the adversity he was facing, from the noise in the media and the pressure. You heard Cole Kmet mention it in the post-game interview after the Washington game. Like, these players know what he's dealing with. They know what he's hearing. And trust me, it gets into the building. Everyone has an opinion now. Everyone can put that opinion online. The media takes a lot of that stuff and runs with it. Some of it's valid criticism, but it's loud, it's heavy, and it can suffocate these guys. For him to endure the most the heaviest and the loudest it's been post Kansas City, come back with his 2 best games of his career. I think from a front office standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, when you're evaluating the quarterback long-term, especially playing in this city where it's going to be loud every time he has a shitty game, it is so important to see a guy be able to endure that, not be shaken from a confidence standpoint, and come out and produce. To me, that's the biggest factor when you're saying, is this guy, does he have what it takes to be the franchise quarterback? Now we have to see it consistently, and we have to see it against better teams.
Absolutely. And, I said before you joined the podcast that I wasn't going to repeat a lot of questions that had previously been asked by other media outlets. I want to try and build upon those. And the one thing I want to talk about next that you talked about was fluid intelligence and trying to find quarterbacks that have fluid intelligence. So I guess just to start kind of a basic, definition, what do you mean when you say you need to find quarterbacks with fluid intelligence?
Yeah. So, something that I learned over the course of 20 years in the NFL, something that was completely foreign to me when I was a young scout. We always talked about Wonderlic tests, at the beginning, and base intelligence. I think to keep it as simple as we can on this podcast, it's crystallized intelligence, and the easiest way to explain that is someone's ability to learn information, take a test, repeat the information,
memorization.
Memorization, sitting still and being able to take a test. Your ability to problem solve, if someone gives you a question and, you're sitting at a desk and it's just crystallized, there's nothing going on that you're having to process in real time. It's just your raw intelligence. And what we saw a lot over the course of the years are guys with incredibly high Wonderlic scores, guys that are incredibly bright. Post snap in a football game, they don't process as fast. They don't see things as well. They don't handle the bullets flying as well as other players do. Maybe guys that have really low Wonderlic scores process stuff really fast in real time in the course of the game. So fluid intelligence, being able to make decisions under duress, under stress, with moving parts, versus crystallized intelligence are 2 completely different things. UCLA quarterback several years ago, Josh Rosen, probably one of the most intelligent players that I ever scouted as far as just his IQ, really high Wonderlic score. I think both parents were Ivy Leaguers, a brilliant mind. After the snap in a football game, not so brilliant. A guy that scored really, really high on a Wonderlic test, but when you watch him play, you would say he doesn't play real smart once the ball is snapped and he's trying to decipher information, process information, and find the open receiver, make the throw. And that's just one example. So how do you measure that?
That was going to be the next question.
How do you measure that? So there was, we used HRT tests. There's all kinds of different personality tests that would give you kind of a processing score, but it never really was applicable to like athletes. And so, for us, the first time we were really introduced to it and we heard about it was right around when we took Mitch, was when the S2 test came out. So this is around 2016, 17, 18. Two athletes from, I believe, Vanderbilt University. I think one was a baseball player. Maybe one was track and field, neuroscience. I don't even know all the technical stuff, but they developed this test because they wanted to measure it, I think, more along the lines of baseball. I think the example they would always use is, why does someone up there, at the bat, see the pitch and process the pitch, what's coming to him much quicker than somebody else. And so, or the instincts to make, a really quick double play transition in the infield. So I think they were trying to measure fluid intelligence after the pitch is delivered, after the ball is hit, to pick up the ball, flip it, all that other stuff that happens in baseball. And how do you measure it? And then obviously, they went out to the other sports. They developed this test. And I'll just say this without getting into too long of an explanation. For all the positions in football, from my time studying the test, there was a lot of correlation with quarterbacks and safeties, which makes probably the most sense. I think the closer you get to the ball, linemen, inside linebackers, tight ends, the scores were all over the place. Roquan Smith, I don't think scored really high on the test, but as an instinctive and fast processor post-snap as there is in football. So it didn't make a lot of sense for a lot of the positions. I think it was a little all over the place, but for quarterbacks and safeties, there was a lot of correlation and accuracy to it, especially at quarterback. So that was our, first introduction to that type of test. There are more tests now. Other teams use other tests that try to measure the same thing. I'm not the best at explaining exactly what it measures. I know the S2, within the S2, there's one score, but there's 10 different components that, 10 different scores, and then it gives you like an average in your final score. And I'll just say this without getting into too much detail, it's for quarterbacks who have scored poorly on that test, it's been pretty accurate as far as their ability to process information from the pocket. If you're a quarterback that makes a living with your legs and one read, pull it down, take off, make a play, obviously not as important. If you're a true pocket passer who has to make a living with your brain, just consistently processing, making throws from the pocket, guys that have scored really, really well on it have been some of the quarterbacks that we would say are much more successful, and guys that scored very poorly on it have not had as much success. Are there outliers? Absolutely. But the data over, this has been 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it's been, it's been pretty strong. It's valid. I think a lot of teams trust the test. We did not have access to it in the 2017 draft. It was so new. I think we knew it was out there, but there wasn't enough data to feel good about it. By the time we got to 20 or 21, I believe, with the Justin Fields draft, we were a part of S2. We liked it. We believed in it. And, so that's the easiest way I can describe, fluid versus static and then how we've come to measure it.
Okay. And let me ask you this about Justin and moving forward, because you've talked about how that not being your guy, so to speak, is a very real thing. And I think when the dust settled with your regime, holdovers from the previous regime, I think the number was 5. I think you guys kept Charles Leno, Kyle Long, McManus, O'Donnell, and Kyle Fuller. And the rest of the roster was totally overhauled. So there's definitely something about bringing in your own guys and winning with your own guys. So when we talk about that with Justin Fields, I put something on Twitter last week. I spoke with a very well-respected NFL analyst. It was off the record, so I'm not going to use his name, but he said something, and I put it on Twitter, and I did not think it was going to have as much legs as it did. Basically said that if the Bears have the number 1 pick, there's nothing Justin Fields could do that should prevent the Bears from drafting Caleb Williams, that he was that high on Caleb Williams. Now, basically what I think he's saying is, obviously, if the Bears have the number 1 pick because of the Bears record, obviously Justin didn't do enough if they won 2, 3, 4 games again and had the number 1 pick. But it's taking it a step further with that Carolina Panthers record and the fact that, I mean, the Panthers, there's some infighting. Frank Reich's talking about how it's tough with this owner. Hayden Hurst is saying some things. So the Panthers are winless here, and they're starting to have some issues. So if Justin plays well, but doesn't, play elite, but, definitely shows that growth, and the Bears win 6, 7 games, whatever it might be, I don't think they're going to win 9 or 10 this year. It's a growing season, but the Panthers do have just one of those awful seasons, go 2-15 and have the number 1 pick. And I know it's impossible to put yourself in Ryan Poles' shoes in that situation, but that would almost be an unprecedented situation in the NFL, that you would have a good quarterback who you don't know if he's going to be a great quarterback, but you have an opportunity to move up with this, this quarterback who everyone's saying the best since Andrew Luck, keeping praise. I know he didn't have a great game last week, but, even a guy like Drake May sitting there at number 2. So you've got these 2 big time quarterbacks available, and you'll have a better idea what you have with Justin. I mean, that would be a big roll of the dice to try and change at quarterback, but it's also the type of move where you could get a Patrick Mahomes generational type player. So what as a front office guy, what kind of insight could you put into being in a situation like that?
I'm very jealous if that's the case. If you have that pick through Carolina, and you're happy with the way Justin's playing, and you feel good that he's good enough to carry you to an eventual Super Bowl, envious position to be in. Like, this is where you give a ton of credit to this new regime and Ryan Poles for the trade they made last year. Obviously, you never can predict what Carolina is going to do, but part of the reason I'm sure they made that trade was Carolina doesn't have a strong roster. They're going to be playing a rookie quarterback. That number 1 pick next year could be very high, and it's looking like it's going to be. So envious would be the first thing I would say. This is a special quarterback. I think, to me, if you're talking next year's class, and I've watched every one of these quarterbacks that is said to be going in the first round, he's special. It's as close to a layup as you're going to get when you're taking a quarterback, and it probably makes sense to compare it to Andrew Luck because he's the last one I can think of where you just knew. Trevor Lawrence maybe a little bit, but, I think there was some, not as much conviction on him. When you watch the rest of these quarterbacks, it reminds me of a lot of typical first-round classes where they're extremely talented, they're worthy of first-round picks, but there's clear holes and concerns, and I would never say any one of these other guys is going to be a layup easy pick. So you're talking about, like you said, once every 10, 15 years. Either way you go, if you keep Justin, that pick's worth gold, and you're going to get gold back. If you feel good about the way Justin plays and you want to go with Caleb, you're going to get something for Justin as well. So they're in an unbelievable situation. To me, just being honest with you, like knowing where Justin was coming out and where Caleb was coming out, like Caleb is definitely the much better prospect coming out. I don't think it would, if just talking out loud here without knowing everything about the player and,
Sure.
and seeing the rest of his film, like, I don't think it would set you back too far, because once you say, hey, we're going with a rookie, now you're setting the clock back a little bit, because it takes time for young quarterbacks to play well in this league. I think his curve won't be as steep, and he'll get there sooner than most. And they still have some roster reconstruction to do on the defensive side of the ball. He would be very hard to pass up from what I've seen of Caleb Williams, and then based on what we know of Justin right now, because I think you and I can look at each other right now as much as I love Justin, as much as I want him to succeed in the NFL, not only because we took him, but because he's a Buckeye and I'm a huge Buckeye fan, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And there's nothing that we can say from his first 2 years and 5 games that we have conviction that he's going to be a quarterback that's going to take us to a Super Bowl. If he gets there in the next 12 games, obviously it muddies the waters a little bit. I'll go ahead and say right now, if you have that number 1 pick and Caleb comes out in this draft, like, that's going to be really hard to pass up. It's going to be really hard to pass up.
Now, let me ask you this. This is kind of just a side note to that, because, you know, I think people love draft day trades and trying to figure it out. And, you know, there's been, you know, more information that's come out lately, like the Jimmy Johnson model and how, you know, teams try to figure how much of a pick is worth and everything when you make these draft day trades. And I know obviously when you have, like, the Bears made a move with DJ Moore and future picks, that's all different. But in a traditional draft day trade, if a team wants to trade up 5 picks and they kick in like the 4th round or whatever in the second, you know, whatever it might be, is that Jimmy Johnson model or the Rich Hill model that we hear about, is that how teams use it, or does every team kind of have their own evaluation process? How do you determine how valuable draft picks are?
Yeah, so that model obviously exists, and there's been several more created. You know, talking to, you know, people that have worked, you know, I never worked a lot on like the specific points of the trade and the trade charts. We had other people that did it on draft day,
okay,
but they're all very similar. They're all very similar. I think when you're talking most trades that aren't involving 1st round picks, everyone's using those charts, and maybe you win or you lose a little bit. It's pretty routine. I think when you're talking about 1st round picks and specifically top of the 1st round picks, there's a lot of based on previous trades that go into it as well. So, like, what's the going rate? When teams have moved up aggressively to go up to the top, you know, though every time that's done, it sets a precedent. So what did San Francisco give up to go up to number 3 a couple years ago? Well, that's going to set precedent, and that's going to be the standard, even if it doesn't agree with the chart. So I think when you're talking top of the 1st round trades, it's going to be a lot of precedents that have been set on prior. No different than a top of the market position player signing a contract.
Right.
You know, that sets the precedent. It doesn't matter what your chart says or what you think you should pay a top receiver. You know what it is now because that guy just got paid that money. That's kind of how those high volume, you know, very important top of the 1st round trades work based on the previous results.
Because to me, if the Bears do end up with that number 1 pick and decide to commit to Justin Fields and they're going to trade that pick with that type of player there, I think you throw the chart out the window. Like,
throw the chart out the window with Caleb Williams for sure. That's just real. Like,
it's a generational haul.
That pick is going to be worth gold this year, specifically because of that particular player. If it was Drake May, obviously it would still be coveted. It would still be valuable. But if Drake May was the top quarterback in this draft, or, you know, JJ McCarthy or Quinn Ewers or whoever number 2 is, that let's say Caleb didn't come out, the pick's still worth a lot. Obviously, it's going to resort back to what did those last few teams do to get up to this high to pick 1, 2, or 3, whatever. With Caleb, you said it, throw him out the window. Like, you're gonna have a lot of leverage there because he's just a unique talent. You know, from everything I've heard, special person, special makeup, from the pocket, anticipation, accuracy, arm talent, and then the creation with the athletic ability. And then once he's outside the pocket, the vision to see and feel, which really separates him, I think, a lot from some of these past prospects. There's very few holes. Like, there's very few, like, well, what about this? Because usually, even with 1st round quarterbacks, you're like, oh, what about this? Or, you know, there's something. With him, it's really, really, really clean right now.
All right. Well, while we're talking about trades, I want to ask you this because I think this is be really interesting for a lot of fans, and that's what it takes to pull off a massive trade. Because you guys pulled off arguably one of the biggest trades in NFL history when you acquired Khalil Mack. I mean, in terms of, the Russell Wilson trade, the Denver was a huge one. Everyone talks about the Herschel Walker trade, whatever that was 30 years ago now at this point. But I mean, 2 first-round picks, you get an impact edge, which is one of those positions that just, teams don't usually give up on. Like, to me, that's not just Ryan Pace calls the Raiders and they talk a little bit and the trade goes down. That to me seems like months of work, ownership. You got to probably get George McCaskey involved with those type. Like, how impactful, how many people are involved in trying to pull off a trade like that?
Yeah, it's when it's that magnitude, even as the personnel director, the person, right below Ryan in the your organizational flow chart, like, I'm not very involved in something like that. Obviously, let's be real. if Ryan and Coach Nagy walked in my office and said, "Hey, we want to trade for Khalil Mack," and I say, "I don't think he's very good," they're gonna roll their eyes at me and walk right out. Like, obviously, we all graded the player. We do the normal protocol. When we hear someone may be available, as many eyes as the building on the player, making evaluations, gathering as much information as we possibly can from sources around the league regarding who the player is. But when it's that kind of magnitude, that's your GM, your head coach, and your ownership, your president. I'm not sitting in those circles and in those meetings listening to what's going on in there. Obviously, it's all about asset relocation now. So what are you giving up financially? Draft picks, how's that going to affect your ability to build a competitive roster? Those are decisions that your football admin cap guy, your GM, and your ownership are sitting around talking about. And like you said, the point of your question, it involves everyone in the building that is at the very, very top of your organization.
All right. And while we're kind of talking about the guys on that 2018 defense, there's one player I want to ask you about, because I think in terms of when you talk about expectation for acquisitions that you guys made, obviously, Khalil Mack was a huge reason for the success of that 2018 defense. I mean, he just was a wrecking ball from the moment he stepped out on the field against the Packers. That first half was that loss that you guys had to start the season in 2018. The Green Bay felt like a win to me. And I know it's a loss to the Packers, but Mack was so impactful in that first half. Like, I look back on that game, I don't think about the second half. I think about what he did in that first half. But another player that was just huge was Akeem Hicks. And I'm sure the pursuit there was because of the ties you guys had to him in New Orleans, and you knew the development that he could be. But the one thing that I always heard, and I think maybe Bill Belichick's lost his fastball a little bit at this point, but that's not a knock on him. What Bill Belichick, I had always heard, if Bill Belichick wanted to keep a player, he kept the player. Always. Like, he never lost a guy. But I had heard that Akeem Hicks was a guy that Bill Belichick believed in and wanted to keep, and you guys were able to get him to Hallis Hall, basically not allow him to leave, get the ink on the contract. What was it about Akeem Hicks, where he was basically, it sounds like to me, whether it was you or Ryan or whoever, like, that was a pound the table kind of, pound your fist on the table kind of guy. This is a guy we need to bring in for this defense.
Yeah. Obviously, to go to the beginning of your statement and question, as impactful as any player we had as far as making that defense special. I think, just talking about free agency before we get to Akeem, when you all hear all the time, teams have $100 million in cap space, and it's not always the greatest position to be in. Guys become available for a reason. And you're oftentimes, as you mentioned, you're overpaying because you're getting in bidding wars for the same players. So free agency, to me, is all about avoiding landmines, because they're out there, and guys become available and get out of buildings for a reason. So for us, it's all, having the familiarity with not only the person and the player, so the talent and the character. And we were more than comfortable obviously with the character. We knew who he was. That one was out there at the time. You got to remember, let's tie this to like what's going on with Chase Claypool right now. Chase Claypool is sending out signals to the NFL that, hey, maybe I'm not the best person to have in the locker room, given what I can put on the field from production standpoint. So it's buyer beware. They could, they traded him, but let's face it, they basically, a 6 and 7 swap in 2025. They essentially just cut the player is basically what they did, because the player is sending out signals to the NFL. I might not be great in the locker room. This happened in New Orleans with Akeem and the head coach. It got a little ugly. They moved on from the player early. They traded him for, it wasn't high. It might have been a 5th round pick, or
I think it might have been like tight end.
Or a tight end, my blocking tight end, whatever it was. It was not a sexy trade as far as compensation goes for the Saints. So you're saying hey, we want this guy out of the building. Like, I'm just going to say what it is, what it really is. Like, we want this guy out of the building because anyone can watch Akeem on tape and see how talented he is. He goes to New England. He plays in a handful of games to finish out that season. You saw the dominance. I believe there was a game against Houston. This is, 6 years ago, I think, but there was a game against Houston late in that season. I think that had been 2016, maybe, where you're not blocking Akeem Hicks one-on-one when he wants to get to the ball. Like, it's just the bottom line. When he wanted to play and he wanted to go, you're not blocking him. And you saw it on that tape. I thought there was going to be a big market for him because how hard it is to find a disruptive interior defensive lineman that can stone the run all day long and also win one-on-one battles and get to the quarterback. They're so hard to find. And when you find them, they're usually on really, really good defenses because they create really, really good defenses. They disrupt the entire game. You see it in Kansas City every week. You see it with the Rams when Aaron Donald, is playing his game. There's one in Tennessee right now, Jeffrey Simmons. Like, they're hard to find. The supply never meets the demand. And he showed it on that late New England tape. I thought there was going to be a big market for him just because of the availability and the lack of supply and the demand being always high. And obviously for us, fit our defense, perfect 5 technique in base, can play the 3 technique in nickel, which you're in 70% of the time. We were comfortable with the character, and you said it exactly right. Like, once we got him in Hallis Hall, Ryan Pace, Joey Lane, outstanding job of making sure that deal got done, and there's no question 100% accurate. We got that deal done because we were in New Orleans with him. He knew us. He trusted us. He trusted what we were saying. I think he really liked what we were doing defensively. We had the best defensive coordinator in the NFL. I think he liked the idea of a big market being in Chicago. I remember the agent coming down to the office. I remember that. And the agent going in with Joey Lane, and there was zero. I think once that happened, and I don't recall the specific details, but there was pretty much zero chance he wasn't going to be a Chicago Bear. And I think, having relationships in New Orleans and having relationships in New England, I think both those organizations, once they saw what he did for us the next, 5-6 years, you always have some regrets. He's a special player. He really is. He was as dominant. Probably should have gotten more accolades than he did, as far as like Pro Bowls and All Pros. Because when you're game planning for a team, I know when we were game planning for a team, and this guy can destroy the game and beat you if we don't double him, don't take care of him. And for us, he was one of those guys, obviously, along with 52 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that you guys did really well that people maybe don't talk about enough, and to me, it's a critical aspect to having sustained success in the NFL. And that's the development of day 3 draft picks. Like, you can't live on day 1, day 2, and free agency. You're just not going to be able to fill out 53 guys. And the fact that you guys, not just like depth pieces and good pieces like Nick Kwiatkowski, who's a 4th rounder, but like Amos and Eddie Jackson, fifth and 4th round guys, and getting guys like Roy Robertson Harris, who was an undrafted free agent, Bilal Nichols, and all that. Like, of course, you expect Roquan Smith. It's a 1st round pick. You have expectations of that. But, when you draft Eddie Jackson, you're not expecting him to be in the running, I wouldn't think, for Defensive Player of the Year in 2018. Like that's not that expectation. So how do you get the most out of those day 3 picks? Is that positional coaches? Like, is there something about that pops on tape? How do you get those day 3 picks to develop, for teams?
I love it. Never one thing. I would say, just being candid, from us, we knew when we drafted a defensive lineman, when Jay Rogers was with us, we felt so good that player was going to develop and reach his potential. Jay was as good as it gets as far as evaluating, having buy-in on the player, and making sure he worked with them to develop them. So sometimes it is a position coach. I'm going to speak more broadly. When we got hired in 2015, Vic Fangio was our defensive coordinator. From the moment we started working to build out that roster, we had an identity on the defensive side of the ball. And we knew exactly what kind of players we needed to fill out the roster to make sure Vic had what he needed to be successful. And I think if you look at the 7 years we were there, from pro free agency and the college draft, we were very successful and consistent drafting and signing defensive players. Other side of the ball, we really struggled. 4 offensive coordinators in 7 years. We never really found our identity on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of that was on us for some draft picks that we made that didn't pan out. When you're picking in the top 3 rounds, those guys have to work out. And when they don't, it creates a void, and it makes it really hard on coaches to develop an identity and establish. So I would say, from the lack of continuity of coaches and then some missed draft picks, we never really were able to sustain an identity on offense. It was always a moving target, what type of run team we were, how we were going to attack through the pass game. And I think it really affected the development of the players. And on the other side of the ball, they came in, we knew what we were doing. We never changed. Even when Chuck came in, we never changed. We kept it consistent, and we went back to Sean Desai after Chuck left after 2 years. Defense never changed. I think we did a really good job communicating it to our scouts. Our scouts did an unbelievable job going out and finding guys that fit that system. And that's why we had a lot of success with defensive players and day 3 guys, and probably why we had so much inconsistency and struggle on the other side of the ball. And that's probably the easiest way to explain our 7 years there.
All right, couple more with Josh Lucas. This is an absolutely amazing interview. Really appreciate him joining me. One thing I want to ask you, it's not quite as relevant as it was a week ago, but I still want to ask it to you, because I think it was really remarkable just watching it from the outside, how difficult here these first 4 games were on Matt Eberflus and the entire organization. Everything that could go wrong went wrong, even with Alan Williams, and there was just so many issues facing the team, and you could see it on Matt Eberflus's face when he was at the press conferences. And I don't think you guys ever experienced anything like that, but obviously there were issues, especially at the tail end of your regime. I remember rumors that Matt Nagy was going to get fired at Thanksgiving, and whether it had any validity to it or not, it didn't matter, because the media and the fans and everyone was talking about it. And I feel like that's got to build a tremendous amount of pressure within the organization. Maybe you guys can block it out, I don't know, but it just feels like that kind of pressure, and it doesn't matter how good of a guy George McCaskey is. He's got a franchise and an organization he's got to run. how difficult is it for not just the head coach or the general manager, but for everyone? You're tied to Ryan Pace. That if he's gone, most likely you will be too. Like how difficult is it to do your job day to day when that kind of pressure is mounting at Hallis Hall?
That's a great question. I think much harder for the players than it is for, this is just my opinion, from being in it and seeing it, and we felt it. Obviously, you mentioned it. I don't know, the first 4 weeks of the season was bad. It was bad for us too at times, no doubt, for several of those years when we weren't performing up to the level we should have been, and then at the end when we were losing way too much. To do your job on a day-to-day basis, honestly, I don't think it impacted, I can just speak for myself. It didn't impact me tremendously. You go in, you know what you need to do, and you get it done. This is where, like, the maturity and the experience of your building is very critical. It's why you got to be careful of getting into this cycle of hiring first-time GM, first-time head coaches. And then if you keep turning them over, you're going to run into the same stuff over and over again. It's almost like a little insanity, because first-time head coaches and GMs are all going to go through it for the first time. So, this is why it's so important that you have other members in your organization who have been through it, have experience. And I think we were very, very young, and it was, I think it was extremely hard on a lot of us because we had never been through it before. But you have to block it out. It helps to have calm voices who've been through it, because at the end of the day, like, as loud as it gets and as hard as it is, none of it matters. The only thing that matters is if you're a personnel person, getting your work done, giving good evaluations, making sure you're trying to set the table. Coaches, same thing. Players, same thing. Go out, and if you win games, it dissipates really quickly. We just saw it, like 0-4, go on the road, win a game, and how much you just like, oh, it just dissipates. And the media, they want, from my experience, and I think they want to write positive stuff. Sure. They don't want to write awful stuff all the time, but if you're giving them no reason to write good stuff, they got to write what they're seeing and what's true. So, I think, to answer your question, like, is honestly and truthfully as I can, like, I don't think anyone in our, building, from a coach or a scout standpoint, I think Ryan did an unbelievable job of keeping that whole building together. Like, you got to realize everyone now has opinions. And so, like, and everyone's reading this on their phone. So, like, it's going to get into the building. Like, it's going to be getting into the building. And this is where I think, to give our regime a little bit of credit, I know we weren't talented enough to win games. So obviously we got fired. We take the blame for that. But we built a really strong locker room, and we hired a lot of really good people in the coaching staff and the personnel side. And we had really good relationships inside that building. And I think when you have some maturity and you have a strong bond and there's not a lot of infighting, it makes it a lot easier. Cancerous people, whether they're scouts, coaches, players, if they're isolated, if you don't have too many of them, they're benign. They get put in their place and they're not too loud. If there's a void of leadership and times get really tough, they can become malignant, and then they start grabbing other people. Obviously we had issues, we had things come up, but for the 7 years we were there, like, I think because of the players we brought in, the kind of people they were, the people that Coach Fox and Coach Nagy put around them, and then obviously the job Ryan did on the front office side, there was good relationships. We stayed together. And even till the very end, there wasn't a lot of infighting, and it never got to a point where we completely fractured inside, because we had mature people and we had good people. We just didn't win enough games.
The bottom line, it's a results-based business. So last thing for you, and again, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. The 2021 off season. obviously led to Justin Fields getting drafted by you guys. And you've talked about that in detail in some other media appearances. But what I was kind of curious about was going into that off season where, you had made the decision and Mitch Trubisky's time in Chicago was going to conclude, that he wasn't going to return. And there was a lot of rumors and conversations about the Bears trying to go out and get a veteran quarterback. And we heard rumors about Carson Wentz. And I think there were rumors about Derek Carr Derek Carr, David Carr, I almost said. But, then it really, you heard, there was a lot of juice to Russell Wilson potentially coming to Chicago. And it got to the point where, Adam Schefter tweets it out. When Adam Schefter tweets it out, it's like Woj in the NBA. There's just certain guys where it doesn't become a rumor, it becomes news that the Chicago Bears had made an aggressive offer for Russell Wilson. There was rumors it was done at Trey Lance's pro day and all this different stuff. So we hear all these rumors. I'm just curious, how close were you guys? How much effort was there at Hallis Hall to try and bring Russell Wilson to Chicago?
Yeah. So obviously you said it, we made the decision to move on from Mitch. So you got 3 cycles before you get to the, your off-season program. Potential trades, pro free agency, the draft. We were in the market for a new quarterback, obviously. That resulted in Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. Every trade scenario was talked through. Would these guys be worth giving up compensation for and give us a chance to win? So obviously we talked about Carson Wentz. We talked about Carr. We talked about Russell Wilson. I think, just to answer your question as it pertains to Russell Wilson, I think the media really blew it up, especially when his agent named the city that he wanted to go to. Obviously, these are conversations that Ryan Pace is having with other GMs. I'm not abreast of like every exact conversation he had with the GMs for these teams. This is my take on it. It never got to a point where there was an offer. There never got to a point that I know of. There never got to a point that there was specific compensation being talked about inside our building, and maybe it was above my head. I think my interpretation of the whole thing is I think Seattle did a really good job of not telling teams they weren't going to trade them until the very end. So I think they left it open-ended. I don't think they were telling people no, but they weren't telling people yes by any means. And then I think, whenever it ended at the very end, I think it was just simply, Seattle saying we're not trading him. I can tell you, I never walked into Hallis Hall one single day and thought we were getting Russell Wilson. Not one. And that is an honest, as clear and honest as I can be. It was talked about. It was much more sensationalized in the media. Did Ryan in Seattle talk? I'm sure they did, but never was it a feeling in our building that he was coming into our building.
Gotcha. Yeah. Because, obviously Seattle wasn't opposed to trading him because a year later they did. So, that was certainly something that was on the table at that point. But Josh, I could talk to you another half hour, but that wouldn't be fair to you. Thank you for so much time. I really appreciate it. And best of luck. And hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill.